All right, well, welcome back to Black Swan Outdoors, and today we are going to talk about the one-time pad process. One-time pad, or OTP, as often shortened for, is a encryption system that's been actually around for a long time. I think that the earliest inception was around World War I. By the end of World War II, it really developed in its kind of more modern form, the way that we think of it. And it was used primarily by the SOE and then the OSS in World War II to send communications via radio, and then within other resistance groups as well, using the same system. The Germans used it, then it really kind of came to fruition, or to its all of its glory, you could say, throughout the Cold War. The Russians adopted it as well, of course. And everyone does a little bit different. So Che Guevara has his own method, which we'll talk about in a blog post later on. And there's other, like I said, there's other variations of this out there. So, but the basics kind of ring true. So we'll talk a little bit about that today. Now, we did recently a post on the one-time pad process, where we have these cards, and also the cards that we'll be talking about today the graphics are based off of from our book, Guerrilla Radio, a urban guide to conflict communications. We talk about how to use the one-time pad with radios and in clandestine communications for organizations. So, one of the things that isn't talked about enough, and I'll talk about it just kind of briefly here, and we could talk more about it or have a specific conversation about tradecraft and what that means. But certainly this is a method within tradecraft of covert communications. But there's a lot of bad information out there in regards to encryption and codes, particularly around radio communications. So there's a lot of trainers out there that are kind of teaching one-time pads with radio communications, but not within the full context. And I think it's really important to understand the tradecraft of this type of communications, that it's not just a technical skill, that you can learn a technical skill and then apply it and then know that you're going to be safe. Tradecraft refers to trade, which is the technical part, and then craft, which is the more kind of creative part of it, the part that breaks up the consistency or the patterns, you could say. And so if you're constantly using one system, as one system, right, you're increasing the frequency of that, then you have prone to not only human errors, but also making mistakes. And so when the Germans got caught using one-time pad, the only time I know the encryption was broken, that I believe, was the Brits finding a German cable. They end every cable with HH for Heil Hitler, and then from there there was enough information that they could start kind of breaking some of the code down. So the point is that if you're sloppy with how you do your work, you could get caught. But then also, if you're also not incorporating how you do your work within kind of a larger kind of component of understanding tradecraft, then you're also kind of subjected to getting caught or having your codes broken, right? So we have to think about it in terms of frequency, duration, and how these things kind of increase exposure to create patterns, and those patterns can be detected, they can be followed, and so on and so forth. So, again, we could probably do an entire video just on this, and if people are interested, we could certainly talk about that. But what I'm saying is that just because you learn the technical part of any code, but this one-time pad process, then that's just not enough. You actually have to learn more than that. And what we do in terms of minding clandestine communications within an organization is we mind the gap. So the gap could be a physical gap, it could be a gap of time as well. And so what we're going to do is we're going to try to communicate within the gap of time or space. And so we find these brief moments of time or space to send our message, to communicate with somebody even face to face. And that's when, in that gap, no one is looking, right? And that's where no one's watching. So they don't even know that the communication is happening, for example. Okay, so the one-time pad, kind of very iconically, or as the name suggests, has to do with a pad. So we have just a little notebook paper here, and then we can write out a series of numbers on the pad. And each one of these pads could be, because they're made of paper, could be easily destroyed. And these are, the pads would be what you use to decrypt a message. And so a sheet of paper, for example, would look something like this. This is fairly sloppy, so I apologize. But I wanted to kind of prepare stuff in advance. So I'd have a whole pad of codes that would look something like this. And my partner, whoever I'm communicating with, is going to have a set of codes like this. So really the whole process begins with having a pad. Now it's interesting to note that some of these pads are made out of kind of a nitroid cellulose material. I forget the exact scientific chemical properties. But basically it was a notepad that actually bursts into flames and self-destructs. So when you see the Mission Impossible movies, when they, this message will self-destruct, it's kind of, I think that's kind of aching to the idea of the one-time pad, that if you were being followed by somebody, you could pull this pad out with your lighter and quickly light the pad, and the whole thing would go up in flames and there'd be nothing left. And that's going to save you from eating an entire pad of paper, right? So generally what you're going to do is you're going to use your code, and then you destroy the code. So then you want to have a lighter with it. And we have a little video, and I talked about this before, where you fold the paper like an accordion, and then you stand it upright, light it from the top. It burns as an ash with very little smoke, and the whole thing is gone. So it's kind of a cool trick that came actually from the KGB. So you can get rid of your one-time pads in a bathroom in a hotel, right, without setting off your fire alarms. Okay, so what we need then is a random list of numbers. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 in a row, and then 5 across with 5 numbers in each sequence. All right, and so that is a pretty standard set, although you can have whatever you want. You can do whatever you want to do, and that is fine. So what we need then is some random numbers. Now there's different methods in which we can get our random numbers. There are you can write out randomly with your brain random numbers. You can use a computer. You can use an online computer or program, a JavaScript-based program. I think it's JavaScript. I don't know what computers are. And you can use die like this, right? To get your random numbers. Now, if you're relying on your brain isn't very random. So you might think it's random, but it's not really so random, so it's not going to be a very good means of doing it. Computer program, particularly one online, leaves a digital trail of some kind, and also you don't really know how random that is. You might not know the program that's being used, so that's probably not going to work as well. Now you can get a number generator that you can build. Actually, you can buy these things, little kits, and buy them and build them and put them together, and they'll create random numbers, and those will work fairly well, but then that means you have to have a little device. You have to be able to build it, and it kind of becomes a pain in the butt. There's these one-time pad making machines you can buy, which is kind of a joke because you buy them and they're like $300. Yeah, it speeds up the process, but it's pretty much the same program that's used online that you can get for free. Or use online for free. So if you have good data hygiene, you could probably get by with making something like that if you're very careful. If you want to go through all the steps, you know, save you $300. But you're really not going to want to lug around a big machine everywhere. That's kind of counterproductive. It also depends on how often you do this, right? If you're using the one-time pad process so much that you have to have a machine, I don't know. And also, if you can't afford time to do something that's important, that's also kind of defeats the whole point of understanding tradecraft, right? Like looking for shortcuts to things to expose that could potentially expose yourself. You know, when you buy those damn things online, right? It's creating a trail, just as if you're using a computer to run a one-time pad generation thing, right? So, but it's going to some guy who's buying, you know, who's bought these devices, and you don't know his computer security. And if the FBI were looking for you for some reason, right? Because you did something, they're going to go to that dude, you know, and look at the list that he has, or any hacker could break into their computer. How do you know what kind of security they have, right? I mean, so there's a whole like, and then also there's a thing like, you could go to a used office supply store and buy a receipt printer, plug that into a Raspberry Pi, and for less than $50, you basically have the same thing, right? So again, I don't understand why, you know, people see something in a Pelican case and then they think it's fucking awesome, but it's the whole fucking thing. The whole thing is stupid, right? So I just avoid it altogether. Okay. So dice, right? We can roll our dice and we can get our numbers, right? We want integers, numbers from 1 to 9 is what we want. You know, so obviously we're not going to get, we're going to be able to get that with the dice. The problem though is that the combinations that make up, the 36 combinations that make up your dice throws, they're kind of weighted towards 7. So you're going to get a lot more 7s, for example, than you will with 2s and 12s, according to a mathematician I read online. So your 2 dice method isn't going to work terribly well. Well, we can make it work, but we're going to save that for a different video, just to make this a little not as long. So actually, you know, why don't we do it now? Because fuck it. I talked about it, so, and it's not going to take that much longer. So basically, what you do to make these random, all right, these you can pick up at a drugstore anywhere. I picked these up for like 50 cents, right? You get 2 different colored die is ideal, right? It doesn't have to be, but preferably 2 different colors. Black and white, I got red and white, that's fine. Instead of reading, you know, the combination of the black and white numbers, so this would be 3, that would be my first number. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put assign a value to that roll. So here's my card here to kind of describe what we're doing here. All of these are the different possible combinations, black and white combinations, and then each one of these is going to have a value. This card is the sample. I would recommend creating your own card and having your own codes and do your own work. This is just to make it look easier. So, for example, at the very top here, if I rolled a 1 and a 1, black 1, white 1, that is going to be 0, right? So that's going to represent a 0. Yeah, because 0, you want 0 to 9 is what we're looking for. Sorry, I think I misspoke earlier. So 0 to 9. So the dice here, white 2 and a white and a black 1. All right. So what is that? White 2 and black 1 is 1. Boom. So that will be our first number. And so we're just going to constantly roll. And as we get our numbers, we'll just write them down on a pad or on a computer if you want to. But if you do it on a pad, that's the best part. Always remember if you're writing something down, write on paper, write on glass or something hard, so that the impressions, don't come up back here, and then someone can just kind of with a pencil and just stencil out exactly what you're doing, like in Indiana Jones. If you ever, so just mind that. Okay, so everything but your black 6 throws, just disregard your black 6 throws, essentially. So those are the remaining combinations. Those we just disregard. Otherwise, that's how we can make it. So it's one little extra step. It makes it slower. What's easier is game dice. You can get these multi-sided die. 10-sided die are probably the best. I've got these multi-sided die for like Dungeons and Dragons. If I get a number like 15, I'm just going to roll that again, and just disregard it, roll it again. And then I can get myself some pretty random numbers this way. I time myself out making a pad with 10 rows of 5, with 5 numbers in each column or each set. And it took me 15 minutes to make. So 15 minutes to make the pad, and then we have to duplicate it because you have to give this to somebody else. So that's 15 minutes, and you're good. And so if you wanted to, you could make over the course of several days, a page a day, and have multiple pages and be ready to go. Okay, so now that we have our code page, looks like this, ready, or something like this. This is our kind of computer generated one as a sample. We can use this as and so we have one that we're going to use for ourselves, and one we're going to hand to our buddy. Now remember here, we want to destroy this after we use it, so it's going to be used once, one-time pad. Okay, so obviously this is a sample. You don't want to replicate what I have here. Okay. So now that we have our random numbers, our one-time pad created, we can get into actually making a code. Now, the way that we're going to do that is we're going to take our plain code, our plain message, and we're going to create with that message, we're going to turn the letters into numbers, okay? And so the process is pretty simple. And I'm just trying to find my right card here. Here's an example which you can see. Our code that we're going to send is meeting at 5 in Chicago. Okay, so we're going to write out that message, and then underneath it, what we're going to do is we are going to assign a number to each one of these letters. Okay, so M and 79 right here on our checkerboard, right? So here's 79 is M. Okay, so we're going to go through the whole thing. We can use spaces, we have pluses and minuses, and so on and so forth. And so what we're going to do is we're just going to create a string of numbers, all right? And then we're going to take that string of numbers and we're going to put that into blocks of 5. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to take this and we're going to subtract by modal 10. All right, so that's basically a mathematical. So it's very similar to like reading time on a clock. Is the best way to describe it. So if you're trying to figure out how many hours there is on a clock of time you have left for something, then you're using that process. So for example, 5 minus 9 is 6, because 15 minus 9 equals 6, and you're just going to essentially drop that 1, that 1 that represents the 10, right? And so you're not going to borrow, essentially. So hopefully I'm saying this as clean as mud. But modal 10 is what you're going to subtract. And then when you're going to be coding this, you take your message and you add modal 10 to that, right? And so the number that you are going to subtract from, if I didn't say that specifically, is in the one-time pad. Right, that's the first number. So generally what you're going to do is you're going to start off a string of 5-letter numbers, and they're all going to start with a key. And the key is going to be a 5-digit key. And that is the first line of your one-time pad. So for example here, this key is 68496. And so on my one-time pad here, it's 6, that's in focus, 68496. Sorry, that's not in focus. There we go. And so that means this is where we're going to start. So I'm going to start decoding or coding on the next series of numbers here until that's done. And again, once they're done, they're done. I don't reuse this pad, okay? I don't reuse these numbers. So basically, just to kind of recap, you're going to convert letters to numbers using a checkerboard. And again, you can use any combination of numbers that you want. It doesn't matter. You can make up your own numbers. You don't have to use what I'm using here. And then you're going to subtract my modal 10 and then get yourself a put these numbers in that string, those blocks of 5, all right, so that it works incongruent with your one-time pad. Okay, now to make things a little bit easier, so I have a kind of a bigger checkerboard here that you can make so that you can kind of carry that with you if you want. But then also what you can create is a code book. And a code book basically just uses common words, the words that you might be using routinely, and has codes associated to those words so that you don't have to spell out long words, particularly if you're using longer messages. So you won't have to write out negative. Instead, you would just use 550 and so on and so forth. So the Russians, when they used the one-time pad process, they just used numbers. They didn't use they didn't convert letters to numbers. And so you could just use this by modal 10 if you wanted to kind of make things a little more quicker, streamlined. But using converting with your checkerboard is going to make it much more secure. But again, it depends on how often you're using it, how frequent, the frequency and duration, and then consistency of your messaging that's going on too. So again, there's all sorts of different ways in which you can do this. You can also use Morse code, to send your messages, which is a code in itself, right? Just because everybody has the it's not a secret, right? Knows the code. It is still kind of a code, and you could, put another layer of protection, particularly with the radio. The message would go by Morse code. You'd have to, decode the Morse code, and then which is easy, but for not a lot of people. So, kind of rambling a little bit, but. Yeah, so essentially these cards just kind of help you kind of keep track of your how to do the process. Again, like I said, it can be a little bit complicated. There's a lot of steps. It's slow. It's laborious. But don't look for shortcuts, I guess is my point. You want to actually do the process in its full and not thinking about this, the coding, and your coding is it's just one part of the process. The whole process, the whole entire tradecraft, it consists of the sending that message and making sure that message is received and doing that in a safe manner, right? The entirety of the process. So it's not just the technical skills of encryption that protect you, it's the entire process. Hopefully this was a good video. I know it went a little bit long here. But if you're interested in these cards, check it out. We have these available for our patrons. Yeah, feel free to reach out with any questions or comments. I'd be happy to answer. And take a look out. We have other videos on the Playfair Cipher, on transposition Cipher, and tap codes as well. Thanks again. Like and subscribe.